Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Good evening, everyone, or good day, wherever you are. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our webinar, ISO 27001 and National Information Security Regulations. Here is the agenda for today. We'll start with a small introduction. Then I will continue with the section Understanding the Purpose of National Information Security Standards. We'll continue with ISO 27001, complement and support organizations implementing national information security standards. And lastly, we will continue with implementing both national information security standards, or a lot of them, and in this implementation, we will integrate with IEC 27001. In the end, we will have a small question and answer session. So if you have any questions, please hold on till the end. My name is Eliza Popa. I am, among a lot of other things, a PCB trainer. I'm also a implementer of ISO 27001 and auditor. On other standards, of course, I achieved, for example, certifications such as CSSP. I'm also a trainer on CSSP. A lot of others from PCB like ISO 27001, 27005, 27032, Lead Cloud Security Manager, and so on. My background is business, IT. So I had 14 years of software development purely for business purposes. And after that, I moved into information security, and I have more than 10 years now implementing information security standards as a consultant, but also auditing and training on those security standards. With this, I will tell you that I covered more than one information security standard or regulation. In my implementations, I blend a lot of several national information security regulations. Also, I add, for example, best practices from all over the world. I implemented PCI DSS, NIST, and so on. My experience also includes conducting first-party audit for a lot of clients where I have done the implementations. So also I want to mention here that whatever I do has provided transferable skills. So I've been working with sectors such as ICT, information and communications technology, oil and gas, government, banking, and financial services, just to name a few. Since 2019, I manage Cyberstrat, which is my own consultancy firm registered in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, and I am also a professional trainer with ISC Squared, PCB, and Cloud Security Alliance for several courses, of course, and also I am a freelancer, ISACA trainer. I would like to introduce you now the objectives of our webinar. First and foremost is to provide you best practices on how to effectively implement national information security regulations. And the outcomes will be for you to understand the purpose of the national information security regulations. I want you to understand also three fundamental processes for implementing information security management systems. How ISO IEC 27001 complement and support organizations implementing national information security regulations, and how to demonstrate compliance with requirements from various sources. And I want you to look at this information that I will share with you from your own perspective. You might not have currently a national information security regulation to implement, or you probably have one, And this, let's say, know-how will help you implement them together. If you don't have in your country, maybe you are in a position where you can influence, for example, influence authorities to issue such a regulation, I advise you to do so. When a regulation is published, it becomes mandatory for whatever organizations are indicated to implement. ISO IEC 27001 is just a voluntary standard, and it is adopted through a strategic decision of organizations themselves, so they are not obliged to do so. Now, by the end of this webinar, of course, I want you to have this clear understanding of the purposes of the national information security regulations that you will hear about in this webinar, and see why they are, for example, implemented first and foremost. And let's see, and let's dive in, understanding the purpose of those national information security regulations. The best example to help you understand the purpose of national information security regulations is based on 3 regulations that are applicable in the United Arab Emirates. First and foremost is the UAE Information Assurance regulation, which has been published in 2014 by the National Electronic Security Center. In 2019, the attributions of the National Electronic Security Center have changed, and the responsibilities for enforcing compliance have been transferred to the Telecommunication Regulatory Authority. Now, in 2020, Telecommunication Regulatory Authority reviewed and republished the same controls, and therefore they remained valid. The purpose of UAE-IR is to provide requirements to raise the minimum level of protection of information assets and supporting systems across all implementing entities, which represent 10 critical sectors: chemicals, electricity and water, emergency services, financial services, healthcare, nuclear power plants, ICT, government, oil and gas, and transportation. In 2023, the space sector will be added to the list of critical sectors. I am currently implementing UAE-IR at the UAE Space Agency, which is the space sector regulator. The UAE-IR indicates controls applicability as well as controls priority, and implementing entities were given 2 years to have this roadmap put in place and implement all controls. The applicability of some controls is mandatory, while other controls can be selected based on the risk assessment results. So for this reason, the controls bear a priority in order to be phased out with the risk treatment process that will be followed after the risk assessments, and controls have priority from priority 1 to priority 4. Second is Dubai Information Security Regulation, which have been published by Dubai Electronic Security Center. It has the purpose to provide all Dubai government entities with the standards to ensure continuity of critical business processes and minimize information security related risks and damages by preventing or minimizing information security incidents. The initial version of Dubai ISR has been published in 2012, followed by a revised version in 2017. Dubai Information Security Regulation indicates that the security domains belong to a class such as governance, operation, assurance, or combinations of them. The oldest regulation, which I will present now, is ADIS, which stands for Abu Dhabi Information Security Standard, and was published by Abu Dhabi Systems and Information Center. The initial version of ADIS has been published in 2009 and was followed by a revised version in 2013. ADIS has the purpose to provide an expression of the information security expectations that the Abu Dhabi government has upon entities and business partners handling classified government data. I want you to see now a processed image of Dubai Information Security Regulation, which indicates that the security domains belong to a class. You see governance, operation, assurance classes, or even combinations of them. I only selected 4 domains out of 13 to show you the classes and combination of classes. And I want you to see also domain 13 cloud security. It was implemented in version 2 back in 2017, when the initiative of moving government IT infrastructure to cloud began. I'm going to show you also a screen from the next standard, which is UAE Information Assurance Regulation. Oh no, this is from ADIS, so we will skip. This is a processed image of ADIS to show you that ADIS assigns a priority in implementation from priority 1 to priority 3 as well. I already told you that UAIR has a priority phased out of implementation. Now, ADIS also, on top of the priority, indicates the type of control, such as directive, preventive, detective, or corrective. Who is well familiar with ISO 27001 version 2022 knows that we have also these types of controls specified in the standard. Now, what differentiates ADIS of the other two is that ADIS also defines 3 levels of categorization of information systems that have a bearing upon control applicability. The categorizations are low, medium, or high, based on the impact of the loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability expected to occur, which entities have to establish for their information systems. Only then they will be able to identify the applicability of each control by reading the correspondent letter under that category. Controls can be mandatory, labeled M, like you see on the screen. This is a mandatory control for no matter the level of categorization of the information systems, or may be suggestive, and then the label will be S. Now, despite the differences in expressing the purpose of each regulation, the common ground is the requirement to implement an information security management system that includes controls for information security governance, risk, and compliance. The publisher of the UAE Information Assurance Regulation, which is the most recent among the 3 regulations, facilitated the implementation of all 3 or 2, if this is the case actually, by mapping the requirements with other leading standards. For example, the mapping of UAE IR, it is available with controls from ISO 27001, ISO 27002. Here I want to mention that the version is 2005, which has been used as reference in the initial publication, and therefore has been maintained in the mapping. Second is NIST Special Publication 800-53, and again, they have used in the mapping on the initial publication revision 4. So it has been maintained also on the revised version. And also mapping with, you see here, ADSIC version 1 and ADSIC version 2. This refers to ADIS, the Abu Dhabi Information Security Standard, although they mention here the name of the entity who created it, which is Abu Dhabi Systems and Information Center. Now, I'm not showing you more than what is below, but it's just a simple mapping to indicate for this control number and control name the correspondent control in the other standards. Of course, UA Information Assurance Regulation includes 700 controls. There will be some controls missing in other regulations, so there will be like a gap. And now, thinking on the other perspective, if you're going to implement ISO 27001, you will have actually, let's say, a full mapping with the UAE IAR controls and even more controls than you have in the ISO 27001 already. Now, since ISO 27001 standard has been revised recently, we have seen new controls. So now when we look back, there is a gap in the UAE IAR. And I would like to mention here, the gap could be on the threat intelligence area, the controls for data privacy, which here in the UAE, we have the regulation and the law that are totally separated. They're not embedded in the information security standard. And other, for example, cybersecurity, purely controls that we probably don't have as explicitly as in ISO 27001. Now that you understand the purpose of these regulations is different from the perspective of an entity that has to implement, for example, a private entity, not the public. They will only have to enter to implement, the controls in the UAE Information Assurance Regulation. If we're talking now about government entities will have to implement both standards. So this has been clarified throughout time. They had already implemented based on their new regulation, which was published in 2009, 2012. They have already, let's say, reached maturity. But when the new standard was published and they were indicated also to implement it, they had to upgrade their implementation. To look now as a comparison, Dubai Information Security Regulation has the shortest number of controls, the lowest number of controls, and Addis has the higher number, 1,300 something controls. I just want you to remember at the end of this conversation that governing, let's say, information security practices is imposed from top down. So your government, let's say, your authorities have to enact such regulations and then make them mandatory for entities, either in critical sectors, either in government, think you name it, whoever accumulates, let's say, a volume of data that deserves to be protected. And if these entities are working with third parties, you have to enforce this governance also to them. As through this regulation, you oblige everyone to protect that data, no matter who is manipulating or processing it. Through outsourcing, you don't want to introduce risk to your, let's say, infrastructure and data. Now, I want to give you now a few considerations for implementation. It is key to know that national information security regulations are mandatory to be implemented by the entities. However, the selection of applicable controls is based on risk. As I said, the component of controls that is mandatory, you can think now controls related to governance, controls related to governance are the organization should have an information security committee, should have a strategy, should have a policy, and controls, for example, related to risk. So there should be a risk management policy as well, and the process to be followed. These controls will always be mandatory. Now, we have them separated also in ISO 27001 in the main standard body controls. The other controls that are technical or focused on security domains to support the implementation of the information security policy and ISMS will be selected based on the risk assessment by organizations implementing the standards. Now, not only that these 10+1 critical sectors are mandatory to implement the standard, DRA, the Telecommunication Regulatory Authority, as the publisher of the second version of UA Information Assurance Regulation, recommends all entities in the UAE to adopt the UAE Information Assurance Regulation on a voluntary basis, as applicable, with the purpose to participate in raising the nation minimum security levels. Now, throughout the numerous implementations that I have had, I want to give you 3 fundamental processes for ISMS, without which you cannot consider that you will, for example, withstand incidents and be resilient in the face of these kind of incidents and disasters. First is the information security risk management process. And these national information security regulations aim at implementing an information security management system that focuses on knowing your current risk. First and foremost, identifying your risk, managing information security risk is the objective for any entity. The current risk is the risk as we speak, due to not being treated yet, or being overlooked during risk identification, or being accepted. High risks will have to be handled either by the incident management process or by the business continuity disaster recovery process. So now that you know the 3 fundamental processes for ISMS, information security risk management, incident management, and business continuity disaster recovery, I want you to assess now your own organization using these kind of 3 processes. Which one is more emphasized? Do they put, for example, more efforts, more resources into incident management? That's wrong. They leave from one incident to another because they haven't done their job to assess, identify, assess, evaluate, and treat risk. Maybe they only have incident management. They don't have a preparation to identify risks and reduce the risk. And maybe also they don't have business continuity management processes in place. So what is out of the incident management process if they fail to contain, recover? It will be a disaster from where the organization will never recover and never continue business. Do this assessment and try to show how they link together. Now I want to show you this slide, and hopefully it will be clear for you. Risk with high likelihood and low impact will lead to incidents that will have to be managed by the incident management process, just as I said. And preparedness is key in responding to incidents. So besides having a documented information for, let's say, incident management process, entities have to assign responsibilities to individuals, members of the incident response team, also define an escalation path, and test their capabilities against simulated attacks. On the other hand, with low likelihood and high impact risk will lead to disaster that have to be managed by the business continuity disaster recovery process. Again, preparedness is key in responding to disasters. So besides having documented information, entities have to assign responsibilities to individuals, members of the business continuity management team, and also have a disaster recovery site and use various tests to assess their business resilience and recovery capabilities. Let's see how ISO IEC 27001 support entities implementing national information security regulations. Firstly, by having an identical vocabulary. Whereas all 3 have mentioned ISO IEC 27001 as reference, this is already ensured. There is consistency in the terminology. All terms and definitions commonly used in information security are presented in the ISO IEC 27000 overview and vocabulary. You don't need to purchase the standard because ISO and IEC maintain terminological databases for use in standardization and allow free search at the following addresses. ISO Online browsing platform is available at www.iso.org/OBP, and IEC Electropedia is available at www.electropedia.org. Secondly, ISO IEC 27001 version 2022 offers clarity in implementing layer security, the concept defense in depth. Controls are grouped by category, such as organizational, people, physical, technological controls. We don't have yet in the other regulations, as they were issued previously. They followed almost the same structure as the previous version of ISO 27001. So the control areas like access control, asset management, and so on, they were the same. Now, new clarity is in the fact that controls reveal their information security properties to protect confidentiality or protect confidentiality of the information. That means protect integrity of the information and availability of the information. Without the security properties, there were a lot of confusion. Wherever, for example, someone wanted to implement a control to prevent malware, they were choosing to have access controls. So this is no. Now with the property, you will be actually guided to choose the right controls. Controls are classified by type: preventive, detective, corrective. So again, knowing this concept that you have chosen, for example, detective controls, you will now understand having only detection in place is not enough. You need to have deterrent and preventative first and foremost, and then you can have some detection. Also, knowing the concept of detection without actually someone monitoring the logs, for example, you will realize that you are like looking into an old picture whenever you are looking at your logs. Now, another clarity brought by the new version of ISO 27001 standard is that controls are classified by cybersecurity concepts such as identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And lastly, controls are classified by function. For example, controls that are administrative, and this you will see in the course. Administrative, for example, are controls related to organizational structure, such as segregation of duties, job rotations, job descriptions, approval processes. Managerial, for example, controls related to the management of personnel, including training of employees, management reviews, internal audits. Another function of controls, legal. For example, controls related to the application of laws, regulations, and contractual obligations. And lastly, technical. For example, controls related to technical measures and technologies. Thirdly, ISO IEC 27001 can help because the knowledge and skills needed to implement and audit ISO IEC 27001 are transferable to implementing and auditing national information security regulations. And this knowledge and skills can be acquired through certification training. The lead implementer course is a 4-day course, followed by 3-hour certification exam. For non-native English speakers, there is an extra 30 minutes on your exam. The lead auditor course, also 4-day course plus 3-hour certification exam, offers again for non-native English speakers a 30 minutes extra on the exam. PCB is accredited by the International Accreditation Service, IAS, for operating certification of persons, such as PCB, ISO IEC 27001 lead implementer, PCB ISO IEC 27001 lead auditor, PCB ISO IEC 27001 master. Due to PCB being ISO 17024 certified by an accredited body, these credentials are recognized worldwide. You can see the accreditation by clicking on this link. You don't have access to click on this link, I'm sorry. So go to the PCB website, just scroll down to the footer. In the footer area, right-hand side, you will see affiliations. Click on that link, and from that link, scroll, you will see IAS logo. Click on the logo, and then you will reach to this link actually, and you will see the full certification of PCB for operating certification of persons. Another way in which ISO IEC 27001 support entities implementing national information security regulations. These entities can be certified based on their implementation of the standard. MCCB, which is formerly known as PCB MS from Management Systems, is accredited by the International Accreditation Service for providing audit and certification of various management systems implemented by entities. Due to MCCB being ISO 17021 certified by an accredited body, the certifications obtained by entities are recognized worldwide. For compliance with ISO IEC 27001 is voluntary, the top management of an entity will take a strategic decision on what should be the scope and boundaries on the ISMS implemented based on ISO IEC 27001. As this scope will be mentioned on the ISO IEC 27001 certification. The scope can be as narrow as a key process, or a department, or the whole organization, and one or more suppliers of critical services, which are definitely outsourced services provided to your own organization. So you can include them also in the scope of ISO 27001 and extend controls to them, so they will continue to secure whatever services you have outsourced to them. Best practices when integrating requirements from various sources are: add controls of each national information security regulation into dedicated Excel files, or use the file if you already have it. Introduce a column for mapping controls, just like you saw in the UAE Information Assurance Regulation, that table. This column for mapping controls will have to be filled manually by you, so identify similar control requirements by reading the standard. It helps if you have access to the PDF files to do search, and then introduce the matching control ID in the mapping column. Here is a file which I created, of course, for each control requirement. Now, that is expressed separately, you have to introduce a distinct record in the table. So if you see a requirement like M1.3.3 contact with authorities, the control requirement is the entity shall maintain appropriate contacts with relevant authorities. And then you have sub-controls, identify all relevant national authorities, including sector-specific regulations. You have to put this as a separate control requirement, and then create another record for point number 2, identify a point of contact in the entity and communicate his/her name to be identified to the identified authorities if required or allowed, and then create another record for the third requirement, establish a policy to determine when and how to engage relevant authorities. This is necessary to allow assessing the conformity and establishing the gap with each requirement. If there is no similar requirement in ISO IEC 27001 that maps to a requirement of the National Information Security Regulation, you can write none. If top management had decided to implement ISO IEC 27001 voluntarily, all controls selected from various sources will be added to the statement of applicability. For ISO IEC 27001 version 2022 includes 11 new controls dedicated to cybersecurity, threat intelligence, data privacy. You also need to check if each of the new controls map to a requirement of the National Information Security Regulation, and if not, write none. Now, to assess conformity and establish the gap, I personally use the evaluation model introduced by ISO IEC 21827 with a scale from maturity level 1 to maturity level 5. This model is largely reproduced by experts to conduct a gap analysis with ISO IEC 27001 and ISO IEC 27002. The maturity levels are level 1, initial, level 2, managed, level 3, defined, level 4, quantitatively managed, and level 5, optimized. Let's see what are the signs of maturity. At maturity level initial, the organization is aware of the problem and the need to investigate it. However, there is no standardized process to do this. There is no general approach agreed by the management. Most likely, when you start implementing ISO IEC 27001 or a National Information Security Regulation, you will start from initial. Of course, you have already, for example, practices, but they are not yet, for example, clearly documented. At maturity level 2, managed, processes have been developed to a stage where different people performing the same task are using the same procedures. However, there is no formal training or communication of standard procedures, and the responsibility is left to certain individuals. They learned on the job. Therefore, the control relies heavily on personal knowledge where the probability of error exists. At maturity level 3, defined, processes, procedures have been standardized, documented, and communicated through training sessions. However, their use is left to individuals, and it is likely that failures can be detected. At this level 3, defined, organizations can be certified based on their implementation of ISO IEC 27001. But some of the controls in the standard requires to be monitored, and usually we monitor through key performance indicators. So at maturity level 4, quantitatively managed, it is possible to monitor and measure compliance with procedures and take action when some processes may fail to function properly. So you will have to have some key performance indicators, key risk indicators embedded in certain controls. So certain controls will achieve maturity level 4. At this stage, the processes are also constantly improved and corresponds to good practice. So signs of maturity are that automation is used, the use of tools, however, is limited or partial. At maturity level 5, optimized, the process has reached the level of best practices, following a steady improvement in comparison with other organizations using the same maturity model for gap analysis. Automation is widely used to integrate workflows, providing tools that improve quality and efficiency and make the organization adapt quickly. Using these signs of maturity, you are now able to conduct gap analysis on any control from any standard and set also desired maturity target. As you just began your, let's say, implementation and all controls are at initial stage, you can set, of course, the goal to reach 3 for majority of the controls. And whereas monitoring is required and key processes require monitoring, you will introduce the key performance indicators to ensure compliance monitoring is monthly. And these can be, let's say, set to target maturity level 4. I have seen organizations setting target 5 for all controls, which is so unrealistic. First of all, if you would like to implement the standard in 3 months, 4 months, you cannot do everything overnight. Most likely you will need 6 months just for the documentation. If you need new technologies, maybe it will be 1 year or even 2 years. Remember when the regulator launched UAIR and gave the organizations 2 years to implement. The reason is whenever you need technologies, you need to request budget. So the budget exercise is this year and you will get the money next year. So have this approach in mind, do your gap assessment, identify your weakest point, compare with the target maturity for, let's say, your own organization, and then create a roadmap and choose to have, some quick wins implemented this year and whatever requires budget next year, if there is a lack of budget. Now, how to demonstrate compliance after you have created that gap analysis? I'm going to show you what I use to demonstrate compliance for gap. I create a spider diagram showing the existing maturity level and the maturity targets as a border, as a boundary. So as this is an incipient implementation, let's assume it is around 0 to 1. It's obviously, for this reason, you can see the inner color orange is very small. And I choose for domains, let's say, that requires level 4, I choose level 4, whereas was not needed, I choose level 3. Now let's see. We have here the main standard clauses, clause 4, context of the organization. It doesn't require any KPI, just to do the understanding of your organization boundaries. Clause 5, leadership. It requires that you have at least a KPI to monitor that information security committees are meeting regularly, like quarterly, and there is, continual improvement coming, like decisions and support and so on. Clause 6, planning, enough 3. Clause 7, support is enough level 3. Clause 4, operations, for whatever OPSEC or SecOps, you will need KPIs. Clause 9, performance evaluation, you will need KPIs, so I set the target at 4. For clause 10, improvement, by itself you will improve if you have all the signs, so it's enough at level 3. Clause A5, organizational controls. There are a lot of good controls there, 37, so there is definitely also KPIs, so level 4 will be the target. Clause A6, people controls. It's enough at level 3, but I want you to put just one KPI that everyone has attended the awareness session and also signed NDAs where they were required or are working with confidential information. Clause A7, physical controls, definitely requires KPIs and also key risk indicators, as well as class A8, technological controls, which requires KPIs and key risk indicators. You can also create a gap analysis report and mention the controls needing improvement or needing implementation if you don't have these controls. Then you should work with other control owners toward achieving the maturity targets. Next, to demonstrate compliance with requirements from various sources in documented information, I personally add a reference table in the beginning of each policy and procedure. As you see here in this example, I am writing a policy which includes the controls clause 4, context of the organization requirements, and clause M1.1.1, understanding the entity and its context. By doing so in every documented information, which is policy, procedure, and even standards like technical, standard operating procedures and other guidelines, I am now certain that I can go back to my GAP file, and I will add also the name of those documents that I have created to address that control. And by doing this, I demonstrate compliance again, that all controls have been addressed in documents. Whereas control requirements overlap, this is how you do it. You don't create two separate policies, and you don't have to create like multiple documents where you cover a topic. So you can bring here in a document everything on that topic that is, let's say, providing guidelines or providing standards or providing policy or procedure terms. Whereas these control requirements overlap, the control will be designed as per the requirements of the national information regulations, because laws and regulations take precedence over standards. And now, you know, they are also enforcing more, let's say, stringent controls. Whereas the national information security regulations do not include requirements such as those recently added to ISO IEC 27001 controls, implementing the control will likely improve the security of information systems and data privacy practices. So go ahead and implement it in the documentation. The best way to demonstrate compliance with requirements from various sources is by obtaining the management system certification based on ISO IEC 27001. The national information security regulations do not bring a certification. They are audited, of course, by a sector regulator, but there is no formal certification acknowledgement, let's say, for compliance. As I mentioned earlier, the scope of certification can be as narrow as a key process, a department, the whole organization, or the organization plus suppliers of critical services. Being a certified organization ensures that the organization can demonstrate due care and due diligence. Due care is also referred to as a reasonable care. It's the standard of care where a reasonable person would exercise in the same situation or under similar circumstances, while due diligence is the exercise of care that a reasonable person is normally expected to take. Those accountable and responsible for ISMS, such as top management committees, information security manager, and other information security personnel, fulfill their roles. This is how we demonstrate through obtaining that certification that they have completed whatever was expected from them, due care and due diligence. Also, an internal audit and external audits occurs at planned intervals, no later than annually, giving the organization chances to identify and correct non-conformities. A management review also occurs at planned intervals, recommended quarterly, giving the organization chances to ensure the adequacy and suitability of the ISMS to fulfill set objectives and make improvements. And with this, thank you for attending this webinar. I just want to show you my contacts. If you would like to contact me, you can use the contact form in my website at cyberstra.de/contact. You can also follow me and my company in LinkedIn. Now I will take some questions. I see.
Okay, yes, thank you, Eliza, for delivering this very informative webinar, and to everyone being with us today. You can go ahead and answer some of the questions.
Oh, yes, I have very good questions. Do you think that organizations should implement both ISO IEC 27001 and National Information Security Regulations? As I said, yes, I fully agree with this. One is mandatory, the other one is a voluntary decision, but will guide you. You will get so much benefits. As I mentioned, you can attend the training, you will realize how well these controls are mapped, how well are explained. It will guide you to implement your national information security regulation. I understand some countries, for example, don't have such regulations, others they have a lot of them. So at least what I told you during this webinar will help you to map and ease your process. Wherever you are, for example, in your implementation, again, ISO IEC 27001 can guide you with the best practices to conduct maturity assessments, identify the gap, and be certain of how to write the roadmap. And I gave you already clues how to write a roadmap, the quick wins this year, technologies which require budget next year. Also, don't forget about your own skills. If you are an implementer without the skills, without the certification training, chances are that it will take longer. It takes longer when you don't know what to do. So attend the training, get that knowledge, and then be proud that you will help your organization actually achieve their goal to implement the National Information Security Regulation faster. Second question, what first step should companies take when seeking ISO 27001 certification for the first time? I advise them to do the gap assessment, to do it by their own. So purchase the standard and then do the gap assessment. Try to answer to the question, do I have what this requirement says I should have? And now to give you one more tip, whatever you see in the main standard body, clauses, clause from 4 to clause 10 are mandatory. In the Annex A, the controls are implemented based on the risk assessment. So you can select and justify or exclude and justify. But for the clauses in main standard body, which are like 150 clauses, now you know how I count them. I have to count every letter, every bullet as a requirement. You will see if you have gaps, and then you will calculate how long it will take for you to fill that gap. So this is the first step. You want to implement that, see the gap. Now, if you want to take it the other way, you don't want to do a gap without having the approval of your top management, then go and discuss with your top management, try to convince them that the reason why you still have incidents, the reason why probably there are some, let's say, attacks going frequently on your premises is that you have not implemented best practices. The first main process, the fundamental process is risk management. Question 3, what are the protection goals of information security? I already mentioned to protect the confidentiality, to protect the integrity, and to protect the availability of information. Okay, information first and foremost. So this is your primary asset as an organization, your information which is used in business processes. So go and speak the business language with your top management and tell them we want to protect the confidentiality of your information, the information that you think deserves to be protected. So just tell us what's that information, and then we will identify the supporting assets, the hardware, the software, the network that supports you to have access to your information, supports the protection of the integrity from unauthorized modifications, and also maintains that system available. So by choosing to speak this language with your business managers, you will make them cooperate and classify the information. Also participate in the risk assessments to identify the impact. For example, the effect on loss of confidentiality of their information, loss of integrity of their information, loss of availability of their information. And you get them on your side to help you now identify what are the critical supporting assets that you need to have, more stringent controls around. I hope this is clear now. And do I see any other question? No, these were the 3 questions I hope I answered. Again, it was my pleasure to deliver this webinar to you. I think I've been told that I have audience from many countries. I would like to know from where you are. Of course, you can contact me through my website and through LinkedIn. Basically, I want you to increase the security of your own organizations. I want you to learn, continue to develop your skills through, for example, through certification training, and support your organization to withstand any incidents. I wish you all a good
Yes.
evening. A good evening for me. It's 7 p.m. Again, I don't know from where they are. I think they are from my part of the world. So I hope to hear from you. Any feedback? Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Eliza, one more time for delivering the webinar, and thanks to all of you for being with us.